Hello and welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez welcoming you back to our podcast series. And today I have the pleasure of recording the ninth in the emerging leader podcast space. And today I'll provide you with a background to my guest. She is currently the communications manager for Australasia for Syngenta, Australia and New Zealand. Can I welcome to the podcast Rayali Banerjee? How are you, Rayali?
Hi, Eric. I'm doing really great, thanks. And thanks so much for having me today.
Mate, it's a pleasure, and thank you for taking time out of a busy day to speak with me. It is very much appreciated. So look, as an emerging leader, I'll start with the questions that I've started with in all of these podcasts. Why have you taken on the leadership roles you have in the past, and maybe a bit of a background as to what's motivated you to look at leadership in the agriculture space, mate?
Sure. So I'll start with my story into agriculture, and it's a bit of an unusual one because I'm originally from India. I was born there and moved to Melbourne back in 2003 after living in Singapore and Malaysia for about 8 years with my family. So my family had basically taken me back on a holiday to Calcutta, which is in the eastern part of India, and we were visiting a few temples in the countryside. And on the way back home, we stopped by a few farming villages. And when I describe farming villages in rural India, I mean a place where people don't have access to electricity. You know, we hopped out of the car and started talking to these farmers, and they were in a cycle of poverty. They didn't have access to fresh food and water. They didn't have access to government funding. And as a 13-year-old, it was a huge shock for me because I had grown up with access to fresh food and water in Australia, and I just couldn't believe that this was the case in the developing world. So growing up, I did a lot of humanitarian work, and giving back was always a part of my personal philosophy. And then when it came to choosing a degree, I ended up choosing a double degree in agricultural science and business at La Trobe University, and had no idea what I was getting myself into because I wasn't from a farm. So I started my degree, and the first year was really challenging. Here I was, a young woman, ready to make change and make a positive impact in the industry. And every single internship that I applied for, I would keep getting rejected because I wasn't from a farm. I looked different. I spoke differently. I didn't understand the agricultural culture and language, and I didn't have any connections in the agriculture industry. So I thought about how I could change that adversity into an opportunity. And so the first ever internship that I did was with the University of Agricultural Sciences, which is in Bangalore, and that was an internship that I created on my own. So I travelled to Bangalore, and I was working with an agronomist at the university, and pretty much everything that I had seen when I was 13, I saw when I went back to India. So this agronomist was servicing over 1,000 farmers, and he didn't have time to advocate for farmers' rights or try and help get them funding. So I was only meant to be there for a couple of weeks, and I actually decided to stay longer because I wanted to make an impact on the lives of these farmers. So basically what I did when I was there was I hosted a few different workshops for the farmers. So one of the workshops was aimed at farmers who were growing really great products but were not able to get the price that they wanted for their products because they were selling into a saturated market. So that piece was about connecting them with the import and export board of India. And then a couple of the other workshops I was doing was helping these farmers who couldn't afford to buy chemicals or seeds. I was helping them farm in a different way, so manage their pest and disease through using integrated pest management strategies. So the third project that I was doing was all about creating a pitch and research document for the local government about why they should be investing back in these communities. And at the end of my time there, not only had I empowered so many different smallholder farming communities, I'd also secured funding from the government to help these farmers buy basic things like pesticides and seeds and applicators as well. So I came back to Australia with all of this energy and excitement, seeing the impact from the work that I'd done, and I thought that I could basically forge a really, really meaningful and impactful career in agriculture. So I went about trying to understand how I could get experience on farms, in business, in global agriculture, and that's exactly what I did. I grew my network through volunteering and attending conferences where I was mixing with C-suite executives from all over the world in agriculture, from government, from private businesses, from public businesses. And that's really how I forged my path. I mean, I have done everything from mustering cattle on King Island to working on oyster farms and grain farms. And I have worked for an agricultural investment company in Melbourne. I have worked in global markets in agriculture with a US-based ag commodities firm, and in India and Singapore as well, working in corporate affairs. And after finishing university, I worked for CommBank in the institutional agribusiness space. And I'm currently now working for Syngenta as a communications manager. And through all of these experiences, I've realized that the fact that I think about a problem differently because I'm removed from the industry and not originally from a farm, and that I have a drive and motivation to basically empower farmers and the farming community to get them to the $100 billion agriculture goal. That's really what has helped shape my leadership capabilities. And I've also done a bunch of really great programs, leadership programs in the industry. So recently I completed the National Farmers 2030 Leadership Program, which is really, really life-changing. And this year I've spoken at Evoke Ag, sharing my thought leadership about how agriculture can attract diverse talent into the industry through my own startup, Ag Boot Camps. And I've also completed the New South Wales Rural Achiever program this year as well. So, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that is probably the best intro to a podcast that I think I've ever had the pleasure to listen to. So that was awesome. I have a couple of questions, or maybe just the one to unpack from that, and that is breaking into the ag sector without that background. So it sounds like you did everything that you could to get practical experience so that people would take you on and give you an opportunity to engage in the ag sector in general. I wasn't picking on a specific area, but is that par for the course in land-based agriculture? Because why I ask this is I come from food production, but from the commercial seafood side of things, and from an advocacy point of view. So I didn't necessarily need to have experience as a commercial fisher, but I had to very quickly become an expert in the content area about the things that were issues for them from a strategic and operational point of view, from what you've just outlined in that introduction, which again was fantastic. Is it difficult to break through if you don't have a land-based ag background? And I asked that for someone like myself. Let's say the next step I wanted to take was to go and work in somewhere around land-based agriculture. Would my background limit me because I haven't had on the ground experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. And look, it was really tough for me. I faced every sort of criticism, from racism to, just being excluded from networking events because I wasn't from a farm. And the first thing that I would get asked in any interaction was where I was from. And the minute I would say, this is what I do, this is who I am, I've had interactions where people would shut down, and that's fine, because that actually motivated me to do more and to do things differently. So yes, it can be difficult, but the things, when I reflect back on my journey, what really stood out was forging meaningful relationships with mentors. And I'll give you a really great example. So in 2016, I had applied for an internship, and it was with a company that I really aligned myself with, and I really aligned myself with their values. And I had applied, and I thought I did really well in the interview. And again, I got rejected. And I thought about, how can I get my foot in the door with this company in a different way? I was following the head of corporate affairs on Twitter, and I found out that he was based in Singapore, but he was coming down to Melbourne to attend the conference. So I thought, right, this is my opportunity. I want to go to this conference and meet them in person. And then I Googled the conference, and it was $3,000 US. And I was 21 and broke. And I thought, how can I attend this conference to meet this person to tell them how passionate I am about the company? And so what I did was I just picked up the phone and I called up the organizers who were based in Hong Kong and New York. And even though that was a couple of $100 extra to my phone bill, I said to them, this is who I am. This is how I can help out at the conference. Can I please come along? And they allowed me to come along, and I met this person at the conference, along with forging great relationships with people from all over the world. And that's really where my networks in ag proliferated. And through that, I have built my brand and my reputation in the industry as being known for someone who is approachable, who connects, informs, inspires other people, and basically gets things done. So through building these relationships with these great mentors, they provided me the opportunities to come and work for their company. And I would just work so hard. And really the recipe for success for me was working hard, doing things differently, and building relationships. And I think once you do that in the agriculture industry, people welcome you because they acknowledge that, okay, you might not have the experience, but you're willing to get the job done, and you're willing to do what it takes to get the job done. So the second part of that I would really like to include in this in the response is, when I was reflecting back on my journey, I thought, the agriculture industry needs to start talking about diversity and inclusion and needs to start doing something about it, because I feel that there wasn't enough being done. And as you said, if you're not from a farm, it's really hard to understand the opportunities that agriculture can offer you, because a lot of people think, studying agriculture, I'll just be on the farm. Whereas, studying agriculture, you could be in communications and finance, you could be running your own business. So that's why I founded Ag Boot Camps. And Ag Boot Camps is really, my mandate with Ag Boot Camps is to build the capabilities of diverse future leaders. And that's through mentoring, through providing them with experiential learning, so hands-on learning with real-world problems. And my long-term thinking is a global exchange, because I feel that in Australia, people working in ag, the ag industry in general, we think locally and we act locally, whereas we need to think locally and act globally, because what we do is so influenced by global agriculture. So in the future with Ag Boot Camps, I'd really like to see a global exchange happen. But right now, what I'm focusing on is mentoring. So
wow, this is awesome. Look, I might come and work for you at some stage, mate. This sounds incredible. Okay, look, it seems that you had to go over and above to get some stuff done, to get into the space that you've gotten into, and this is really a good learning. And hopefully those listening to the podcast pick up on this, is that, and you've shone a light on this for me, because I've not really encountered racism in my sector, to be honest with you. It was more around experience. And so when and I'll share something with you and for the listeners, when I first started in this role 10 years ago now, so I was a lot younger man back then, I went to Townsville and we had a meeting of the local commercial fishers, and the older guard, the older blokes would come up and start calling me Sonny and treating me like I'd just stepped out of the university. At that point, I'd had 10, 12 years of work experience under my belt, and you had to prove your worth to them, because if they'd not known you before, you're an unknown quantity. And so I totally get why you have to prove your credentials, but definitely in this industry, as in the commercial fishing industry, it really is about proving that you understand how the industry works. And so everything you've said makes a lot of sense to me. And look, I hope a lot of young leaders get to listen to this, because if you can't get in to your dream industry one way, then you try everything you can the other. And that story about contacting the organisers is a fantastic one, because you would have tripped them out, getting a call from someone in Australia, hey, I want to help out in your conference. I don't want anything but a capacity to go and meet some people. That to them would have sounded like gold. And those stories get out down the track as well about your willingness to do things. So yeah, it's quite an inspirational story. Look, I just wanted to ask you, because you've touched on some of these things, so I'll get some of these questions out of the way. From your experience, what do you think are the most critical leader capabilities? Because it sounds like you've probably met a lot of really interesting leaders in your travels. So what can you unpack for us as being the most critical capabilities amongst those people you've met in your travels, Rayali?
So the most important part for me when working with any leader is, and what's been, I guess, very inspiring on my journey, is when I've worked with leaders who set a vision, a strategy for their team, and they actually empower individuals to reach that goal on their own. So someone who informs, who educates and inspires. So at the end of the day, I really believe that leaders don't create followers, they create other leaders. And that is my biggest takeaway from having worked with leaders all over the world.
Fantastic. So let me unpack that a little bit more again, if I could. I've got three areas here that are of interest to myself, trying to learn more about the leadership game, and that's communication. So obviously that's an area that you've got a lot of experience in, and by the sounds of it, you sound like a very confident communicator. But in terms of the leaders you've met and in your own travels, how important is communication as a leader capability?
Absolutely. It's critical. I mean, communications enables people to be connected to a business, connected to a brand, connected to an industry. So for me, the biggest part, and I do this a lot in my role as a comms manager at the moment, is I share the stories of our people internally and externally. And I share the great work that our leaders are doing that are helping grow our business in Australia and New Zealand. So I think it's a really, really critical skill to have as a leader.
Strategic thinking. What's your view on that as a critical leader capability?
Yeah, again, another critical capability, because it's one thing, I think, obviously everyone works in a different way, but I get really excited, engaged and motivated when a leader comes to me and says, okay, this is the big picture thinking. As an example, if I use one of the companies that I worked for previously, we want to be able to, dedicate resources to rural and regional Australia and make sure that when they're going through a tough time, we are known as a brand who supports them. Who supports these communities. And so that was a big picture vision. And what the most important part of strategic thinking is that you gather a team around you that has got same vision as you do, but they can challenge you, they can make you think differently and empower you to do things differently. So yeah, another critical skill that requires, obviously analytical skills, big picture thinking, but also getting a team around you who will champion that cause.
Yeah, brilliant. Again, and you touched on the last one, which I have an interest in, and that's foresight. So looking at possible futures, whether that's a day, 5 days, a year away from what it is that you're doing. Is that something that you've seen or dealt with in your travels with leaders that have you met? You might term that visionary leader that's looking at what's the next challenge, what's the next disruption coming, how are we going to get to where we're getting to? Have you come across that? Is that something that's of importance to yourself?
Oh, definitely. And I look at Syngenta and our global CEO, Eric, he is passionate about climate change, and as a company, we are doing the way that we innovate and the way that we create our products and services. It is all about dealing with the problems that are not going to just affect the farming community now, but into the future. So the big picture thinking like climate change, sustainable farming, but encouraging biodiversity on farms. These are all big pillars of the company. And to have a leader like Eric Searwald or who's our global CEO, or even our local leaders in Australia and New Zealand who are working day in and day out to make this vision not just a vision, but actually being able to measure it by outcomes, that is really important to me. And that's one of the reasons, I joined Syngenta, because I know that the work that we do, it's measurable in terms of the impact we have on farmers, not just commercial farmers, but also smallholder farmers in the developing world. The impact that we have on the environment, it's all positive. So yeah, I think it's one thing to have that thinking, but it's also another thing to be able to say, look, this is the outcomes of the work that we're doing.
Yeah, excellent. But let me move you on to the next topic area, which is around emerging versus established leaders. And I'm not saying that as a pit one against the other, but I'm interested to get your thoughts on the following question: What do emerging leaders like yourself bring to the table that established leaders don't?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And look, I want to start by saying that both have a lot to learn from each other. So I know that I get so much value and insight from talking to an established leader who has been in the industry for 20 years, for 30 years. They have got so much knowledge within them that, I find it so valuable having that interaction. And they've got, when it comes to things like process or how things should be done or how we can get things done, I think established leaders are so great at providing that strategy and that vision. Because of the experience. Where I think emerging leaders come in is, look, even when I reflect on the past 5 years, there are so many things that when I started my degree, ag tech wasn't a big thing. And then 2 years into my degree, ag tech had revolutionized the way farmers farm in Australia. And so things are always changing in agriculture. And so for me personally, I've always had to be agile. I've always had to adapt to uncertainty. I can give you another example, and that was when I was working in India for also with Syngenta in corporate affairs. And the Indian market can be so volatile for businesses. And so I had to deal with volatility, with uncertainty, and with risk, and I just had to adapt. I might not have known something, but I just had to be agile in the way that I discovered the information and made something out of it. So I think emerging leaders have got this ability to look at a big picture problem and provide fresh, new ideas, and not just ideas, but ways of how we can get it done, because I think we're just so used to things changing all the time and working in an uncertain environment. And look, I think emotional intelligence is a big thing for me when it comes to leadership. So, and I think, established leaders are great in the sense that they've got years of managing teams and leading teams, but I think also emerging leaders have got a lot of value to offer when it comes to dealing with people from all different walks of life as well.
Yeah, excellent. And look, you have touched on this next area, but I'll just clarify a few things. So next area is leader development. And I was going to ask, what professional development have you engaged in? You've already given some really key examples. So conferences, university degree, establishing your own networks to get people in and doing experiential learning and so on. I guess the next logical question, because you've answered that one, is do you have a view on lifelong learning, Rayali?
Yeah, for sure. I am so committed to lifelong learning, and I personally have got a growth mindset, and so there is not 1 minute in the day that I waste. So my every day is a new day to learn. So every day I get up, head to the gym. After gym, I listen to a podcast or a TED talk. So after work, it is all about personal development or study. So some really great resources that I use are things like LinkedIn Learning and this week I'm actually have dedicated some time to learning about executive leadership and what that means and how I can implement that in a workplace. So I'm learning every day. On the weekends, again, I'm really passionate about global markets. So just the weekend that passed, I was looking at how Australia and India can have a really positive economic relationships when it comes to bilateral investment in agriculture. So yeah, I'm so committed to lifelong learning, and it really excites me to learn something new all the time and understand how I can use that learning in my own work. So,
yeah, that's great, and that seems to be the tenor of most people when asked that question, is that you've got to just keep fresh, otherwise you'll go stale if you're not trying to, whether it's in a work context or in a social context. You can't sort of close your mind off to that stuff. Look, just again, when you mentioned your mentoring experiences, and you've kind of answered that, you've engaged in the mentoring process. What individuals, without naming them, of course, have you drawn from to develop your leadership approach as part of that mentoring? So was there someone that you you asked to be a mentor and you've modeled yourself on that person? Is it a conglomeration of different people, or what, or a mix of those things? Like, I'm interested in that question, Rayali, because this has come up quite a bit, and I think everyone that I've been speaking to so far tends to lean towards what you would call a informal relationship with mentoring, and so they might have multiple mentors, and there's not a scheduled time necessarily. It must be 3:00 every Monday, but you sort of go with the flow. And so, what approach have you taken in that context?
Yeah, great question. So I might answer it in two parts. So when I have sought out mentors, and every time I have, it's always been strategic. So all of my, I guess, mentoring relationships are strategic and usually relating to a point in my career or in my life where I'm seeking to develop a specific skill. So when I was at Combank, for example, I actively sought out mentors internally who could really help me understand the complexities of lending to large corporate agribusinesses. And I really enjoyed learning from both my C-suite executive mentors, because that's an aspiration that I've got for myself, to get to that C-suite level one day. And I also enjoyed and I got a lot of value out of learning from my direct line manager as well, who had been, experienced, had years and years of experience in banking. So, yeah, and I mean, even working or having worked with global companies, I've developed mentoring relationships with people who live and work overseas. And so, yeah, I mean, the process it's not formalized. It's more, when I need to learn something, or there's a topic of interest in the news that's really exciting. Or I think mentoring works both ways. So every time I have a relationship with someone, it's not about just me learning from them. It's how can I give something back to them? How can I contribute to a piece of work that they're doing? So it's very much a two-way street and platform for me. So that's a bit about when I've sought out mentors, and when I'm actually providing mentoring. So through Ag Boot Camp, I'm actually mentoring 3 young women at the moment, and my leadership style is very much, as I said before, it's about inspiring through my own story and helping them realize what they can do with their skills and how they can add value to the companies that they work for or within their own businesses. So I am a very open and honest and transparent communicator. So yeah, that's the way that I mentor as well. And again, it's informal. It's not very formal, but in terms of having a certain step process. But I do know that, for example, I mentor agricultural science students at La Trobe University, and they've got a specific platform set up that is quite formal. And I think the positives about that is that it keeps both the mentor and mentee accountable.
And that definitely answers my next question about the informality versus formality. And I think outside of the university or high school context, that informal arrangements leave some flexibility there, because people get busy, life happens, and all sorts of things can be thrown your way. So no, I understand that. Look, that's fantastic, and the fact that you're mentoring and as an emerging leader is also to your credit, that you're trying to bring up women in the industry and just young leaders in general. So there are a lot more out there than you might think, Rayali. Having had these discussions with other emerging leaders, I think there are a lot of people interested in the ag sector that don't have an ag background that would do well to listen to your story, or at least understand that not everyone comes from that background, and they can still have a passion for food production and all of the hundreds of different types of jobs you can get in this industry. So look, I'll go to the last question for the podcast, mate, and this is one that has thrown me every time I've asked it, but I'll keep asking it. Leaders are born, not made. What's your views on that?
Look, I think that leaders are made. So, I think that your leadership, your career, your personal life is what you make it out to be. So if I look at my own example, my aspirations are to be at a C-suite level before I'm 30. And I'm taking the steps and learning from my failures, learning from my setbacks. And every day I work at getting one step closer to my goals. But if this was me 5 years ago and I had zero experience in the ag industry, I would have still said the same thing because, I was not born a leader in agriculture. I was not born on a farm, but I had a passion, a commitment and dedication to make something meaningful out of my life. And not just that, but to leave a lasting impact on the industry. And so I would say that it's a culmination. My journey to date is a culmination of my mentors, people who have believed in me, people who have empowered me after setbacks and failures. And it's a credit to myself and the fact that I have worked really hard to get to where I am today.
And for those listening to this ninth in the series of Emerging Leader podcast, I've been speaking with Rayali Banerjee. Look, Rayali, I do appreciate your time. I know that you're busy, and look, I'd love to come back and talk to you about some other leadership issues into the future. For those listening, this is Eric Perez from Talking Leadership, and I'll catch you all in the next podcast. Thanks very much.